we're looking at the wide receiver position tonight. So let us know what you got, and I will certainly have some comments, I'm sure.
Okay, so number one, and this is what, guys, it's a lot of work to kind of put some of this stuff together. So what I'll do is I just throw out the process. I list all the teams SEC order, and then I pull out their wide receivers, put them on my piece of paper, write down their stats from last year, recruiting rankings, stuff like that. It's ways to do that. So you're going to hear my paper flipping, because if I just made a list of 1 through 16 and try to decide it, that'd be way harder than putting them on paper and then just writing a number next to them. But number one, I got Missouri. I think Missouri is the best wide receiver room in the country. It's hard to debate that when I think Luther Burden is probably one of the 2 or 3 best wide receivers in the country. Last year, 1,212 yards, 9 touchdowns, 86 receptions. They bring back, by the way, their top 3 wide receivers, which, and again, why I have him ranked number 1. Theo Weiss, us Texas fans know him, started at Oklahoma. He did a really good job with them last year. 49 receptions, 682 yards, 6 touchdowns, 13.9 yards per catch. And then a guy that us Ohio State and Texas fans know, Mookie Cooper, the slot wide receiver there, 36 receptions, 447 yards, 0 touchdowns, 12.4 average. I went about 5-6 deep on these guys. So the next 2 are Marquise Johnson, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns, but a big play threat. He averaged 29.5 yards per catch last year. That's insane. And then Mekhi Miller, he only had 11 catches last year, but that is the number 1 room in the country for me. And then I had a debate with myself between my 2, 3, and 4, and my 2 is Ole Miss. They have Trey Harris, bringing him back with 59 receptions, 985 yards, 8 touchdowns. They also bring back their second leading wide receiver with 53 receptions, 741 yards, and 3 touchdowns in Jordan Watkins. Now, this is where you can debate them falling down, because this guy has to stay healthy, and he really hasn't. Last year, he only had 3 catches. That's Juice Wells from South Carolina, the transfer. But he had 1,250 yards receiving in 2021. So do I think he can reach that status again, especially in a loaded room? No. But can they get him to 500, 600 yards receiving and have him at 5 or 6 touchdowns and a nice third down option to move the chains? I do think they can do that. And then Deion Smith, who transferred from LSU, he had 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Caden Lee, 5 receptions, 114 yards and 2 touchdowns for him. Next, we do have Texas. I think you could debate them all the way up to 2. I think you could drop them all the way down to 4. Alabama wide receiver Isaiah Bond comes over, 48 receptions, 668 yards, and 4 touchdowns for him. I think either him or Matthew Golden is going to be the number 1 wide receiver on this team, and I think they're going to put up very good numbers, enough to probably be a late first, early second-round pick in next year's NFL draft. Matthew Golden, like I said, 38 receptions, 404 yards, 6 touchdowns for him. Silas Bolden, the human joystick, I know that name's already taken by Dante Hall, but that's who he honestly kind of reminds me of. 54 receptions, 746 yards, and 5 touchdowns for him at Oregon State. Dynamic punt and kick returner. Same with Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden last year, I believe, had 2 touchdowns and like 20 opportunities between the punt and kick return game. So that's really good, obviously. And then Ryan Wingo coming in as a freshman, the number 7 wide receiver in last year's class. He had 2 touchdowns in the spring game. I expect him to have a fantastic freshman year. You also have DeAndre Moore, who was the number 19 wide receiver in the 2023 class, and Jonte Cook, who was the number 7 wide receiver in the 2023 class. I expect all 3 of those guys to get a lot of playing time. Like, if we're ranking 1 through 10, I could have kept going, and Texas has some really good players at number 10, but I think that's unfair. If you look at most teams, they play 5 to 6 guys. Obviously, if injuries happen, that changes, but they are my number 3. Number 4, I was lower on this team last year. I had them at 8 or 9. This year, I did bump them up. They had a really good year last year. Oklahoma is number 4. Nick Anderson, I know he did really well in the Red Rivalry game, but his season was really good for a freshman. 38 receptions, 798 yards, and 10 touchdowns as a freshman is really, really good. Jaleel Farouk had a really good season as well. 45 receptions, 694 yards, 2 touchdowns. They bring over Deion Burks, who I know there's some issues with him off the field. I don't think he'll get suspended for that, and he's a really good player. He's kind of like Silas Bolden from Oregon State, really agile, really smooth route runner. 47 receptions, 629 yards, and 7 touchdowns for him. Andrell Anthony is also coming back, 27 receptions, 429 yards, 1 touchdown. The reason why I did rank them high in Texas, I think Texas has higher upside potential with Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden. I think if we're talking about NFL draft going into next year, I think those two guys are probably getting drafted ahead of anyone here. But this is a really solid room. I really like them. If you want to argue them all the way up to 2, I wouldn't hate it. But I do have them ranked at number 4. Number 5 is at Georgia, and I don't know why, but this room's getting more love, in my opinion, than it should. I think there's a lot of good players here. I don't think there's any first-round picks here. Hell, I don't even think there's any second-round picks here in this room. Obviously, you have a good tight end, but we'll rank those rooms later. And Oscar Delp, 54 receptions, 613 yards, 4 touchdowns for Dominic Levitt, leading wide receiver, or he's the leading wide receiver coming back. Obviously, they lost Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. Originally played with Missouri. Imagine if they had him still with the wide receivers they have. Dylan Bell, 29 receptions, 355 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's a good player. And then Ra Thomas, who came over from Mississippi State last year, he didn't really produce. Honestly, he probably should have stayed at Mississippi State. 23 receptions, 383 yards. He had 1 touchdown. He was okay. And then a guy that, if he does produce, especially he produced at Vanderbilt, London Humphreys, this room could move up. This is the one guy in here that's an X factor for me that probably does scare me. 22 receptions, 439 yards, 4 touchdowns. Those are very good numbers to play at Vanderbilt. Like, he could catch 700 to 800 yards receiving this year. So that is the one guy that is the X factor that could bump this room up. And then Arian Smith, not much to say here, 8 receptions, 153 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That is my number 5 room. And then after this, guys, it's hard to rank these rooms, honestly, especially the first 10. Kyron Lacey and LSU is number 6 for me. 30 receptions for him, 358 yards, 7 touchdowns. But again, he played behind 2 NFL wide receivers, so I expect his numbers to soar. It would not shock me if he triples his numbers, gets up around 1,000 yards wide receiving. And then they bring in a guy from Liberty that Texas was interested in. It was CJ Daniels, Deion Burks, Juice Wells, and Matthew Golden were like the 4. They concentrated on Matthew Golden, ended up getting him. I think if we're ranking who they wanted, I think Deion Burks would probably been 2. I think CJ Daniels was 3. And I think Juice Wells scared Texas because of his injuries. So CJ Daniels, definitely a really good player. 1,067 yards at Liberty and 10 touchdowns, 19.4 yards per catch. So really good numbers there. Chris Hilton Jr. had 13 receptions, 255 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then Aaron Anderson, 12 receptions, only 59 yards for him. And they also bring on Xavier Thomas. He was the second leading receiver for Mississippi State last year with 503 yards and 1 touchdown. I think he could be the second best wide receiver on this team. We will see, though. So I have them ranked at 6. Number 7, I have 1 second. It's going to take me a minute to find it. Number 7, I have Tennessee. Now, this is going to be controversial because of who I haven't ranked yet. I'll rank them next. I know everyone's thinking it. Number 7, I have Tennessee. Squirrel White, 67 catches, 803 yards, 2 touchdowns. I'm really high on this room. This is a room, in my opinion, at the end of the year. This could be the second best room in the SEC. I really like the talent here. They bring in Chris Brazzell III from Tulane, 44 receptions, 711 yards, 5 touchdowns. Brew McCoy was having a pretty damn good year in his 5 games. He had over 200 yards receiving in 5 games last year, and then he broke his leg, unfortunately. I think he's going to have a really big year this year with Tennessee. And then DeAndre Thornton, 13 receptions, 224 yards, and a touchdown last year, but they kind of moved him to the outside where he belonged. I think he was playing a lot of slot last year, which didn't make a lot of sense for his size, so he'll play outside this year. And then Mike Matthews is the number 9 wide receiver in the class of 2024. So there's a lot of talent here. I really like this wide receiver room. And you have Nico coming in a Josh Heupel offense. I fully expect this to jump up a little bit higher, but I can't do it. There's not enough productivity here yet for me to jump them up. Number 8, and you finally get here, but it's honestly not as good of a room as I thought. You had a lot of departures, and that's Alabama. You lose Jermaine Burton. You lose Isaiah Bond. You lose Malik Benson. Your leading wide receiver who was on the team last year was Kobe Brentis, 18 receptions, 314 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he's got the bad case of dropsies, guys. Any Alabama fan you will talk to, the man he can't catch the ball. That's like his biggest thing. And what do you know, as a wide receiver, you kind of have to catch the ball. So if he's your best wide receiver returning, I cannot rank you that high. There's a lot of talent here, no doubt. You also bring in Jeremy Bernard from Washington. He had 34 receptions, 419 yards with them. I think he'll have a really good year in this system, again, under Kalen DeBoer. He was the 4th option at Washington. He's probably going to be the 2nd option at Alabama, at worst 3rd. So I think he's going to have a really good year. Kendrick Law is also here as well. 15 receptions, 135 yards, 0 touchdowns. And then Jalen Hale, us Texas fans know him. He's a speedster. I think he's going to have a good year as well. 5 receptions, 148 yards, and a touchdown last year. He averaged 29.6 yards per catch. So again, a burner that can get down the field. And that is Jalen Milroe's strength. So I fully expect that to be the deep ball connection here. And then 2 guys I will mention, they had the number 6 tight end in the class coming in named Caleb Oden. Well, he is no longer a tight end. He is a wide receiver. They saw him at spring camp and was like, you're not a tight end, you're a wide receiver. So he is a wide receiver now, and I fully expect him to be a good wide receiver. And then Ryan Williams, another guy Texas fans will know because down to the wire, it was Texas or Alabama. Most of us Texas fans knew it was a long shot. Ends up at Alabama. He's the number 3 wide receiver in the class. I fully expect him to have a really good freshman year. And I like this room. There's a lot of potential in this room. There's just not enough productivity, and that's why I ranked him 8. And number 9 is kind of in the same boat. I really like this room. Auburn. You have Cam Coleman, the number 2 wide receiver in the class last year. And then you also have Perry Thompson, number 8 wide receiver in the class. So you have 2 top 10 wide receivers coming in and do a Hugh Freeze offense. You also bring over Robert Lewis, who I'm pretty sure I could be wrong on this. Mark can correct me. Georgia State runs the triple option, do they not? And he had 827 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. That's pretty damn good for a triple option wide receiver. And he's going to a offense in Hugh Freeze now that I think will be pretty good if Peyton Thorne can get his act together. And then you also get Keandre Lambert-Smith in the transfer portal. This is, again, not enough productivity. If Robert Lewis had played at a bigger school, I probably would have bumped them up a little bit more. But your 2 best wide receivers, in my opinion, are both freshmen. Your 3rd is either Keandre Lambert-Smith or Robert Lewis. And Keandre Lambert-Smith had an okay year last year, but not a great year. So this class has a lot of potential. I really like it. But overall, I had to rank them at number 9. Number 10, I went with Kentucky. And I think you can debate my 10 and 11 pretty hard, honestly. I may have even gotten it wrong. We'll have to see. Barrion Brown, I have at Kentucky, 43 receptions, 539 yards, 12.5 yards per catch. He's one of those guys that if he jumped in the transfer portal, there'd be a ton of schools after him. I know for a long time he was linked to Texas. Like Texas was hoping he jumped in the transfer portal, and he never did. And then they bring in a North Texas product, Jamori Macklin, 1,000 yards receiving and 11 touchdowns. So those are really good numbers. You're taking North Texas best wide receiver, bring him to the SEC. We'll see if he can compete. And then Raven Cottrell, 1 reception at A&M. He's coming from A&M, and he only's got 1 reception, so we'll see what he does there. You also bring back Dane Key. He had 42 receptions last year, 636 yards and 6 touchdowns. Anthony Brown-Stevens, only 5 receptions for him and 44 yards. And then Fred Ferrier from UAB, 18 receptions, 266 yards and 1 touchdown for him. So 2 decent transfers from North Texas and UAB for them. And then number 11, again, you could debate that this team a little bit higher as well. Florida, I'm going to butcher this guy's name. Mark, maybe you can help me out with this. The transfer from Wisconsin.
Shamir Dike?
Yep, Shamir Dike. 19 receptions, 328 yards and 1 touchdown, 17.3 yards per catch. They also bring back, I think, a guy that's not getting enough love. I didn't even know he was on this team till I did the research. Elijah Badger had a really good season at Arizona State last year. 65 receptions, 713 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I think that's a name to look out for. And then a guy that had a really good season last year and his only sophomore season is he was a freshman last year. He'll be a sophomore this year. Eugene Wilson had 61 receptions, 538 yards, 6 touchdowns. And then you have Khalil Jackson, who had a touchdown on 21 receptions last year. And Jaquavion Frazier had 4 receptions for 44 yards for Florida. Now, after this, complete drop-off. Like a really big drop-off. It was really hard to do, or it wasn't hard to do after this, but A&M, honestly, it's kind of sad where this wide receiver room's gone because you had Evan Stewart last year. You had a bunch of other guys that come in, and then you're kind of left with this. Ja'Day Walker actually had a decent season last year, 590 yards, 2 touchdowns. But then you're relying on someone like Noah Thomas, who only had 359 yards. Moose Muhammad kind of has the same issues as Kobe Prentice. Good player, good lineage. His dad was a fantastic player in the NFL. and he cannot catch the ball. I don't know what happened to him last year, but he only had 345 yards, and a lot of that was because of drops. 2 years ago, or no, the year before, sorry, yeah. So 2 years ago, 640 yards and 4 touchdowns. So he had a much better year 2 years ago. If he can live up to that standard, you could probably bump them up maybe a spot, maybe. And then your best player, honestly, is probably this guy from Troy, Jabre Barber, 75 receptions, 999 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So no offense to A&M, but if your best player is from a small school transferring in, that's probably not the best thing. But I could be wrong on that. He could have a fantastic year. I don't know. Number 13, I believe I have Arkansas here. They have some nice pieces. Andrew Armstrong, 56 receptions, 5 touchdowns, 764 yards. Yeah, 764 yards. Then it really drops off after that. Tyrone Broaden, 15 receptions, 109 yards. Isaiah Sagna, he only returned punts and kicks last year. Didn't catch a pass. That's not looking very good. Isaac Tesla, 34 receptions, 351 yards. And then Jaden Wilson, 15 receptions, 199 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And this guy right here, Jordan Anthony, transferred from A&M. I don't know if I'm wrong on this. I tried to look everywhere for his stats. I don't think he has stats because I think he's a full-time track guy. So no offense, if he's a full-time track guy and he's going to be one of your 5 or 6 best wide receivers on top of this, guys, get this. They bring in a minor league baseball player who's 28 years old who's also going to play a factor in this. This is a bad wide receiver. This is not good. On top of that, you have Taylon Green. I mean, it gets bleaker and bleaker every time I look at Arkansas and break down these rooms, and they come in at 13, and that tells you how bad the last couple are. Number 14, I have, let's see, what do I have here?
Mississippi State.
Yeah, so it gets not good there either, guys. Mississippi State loses a lot. They lose their 2 leading wide receivers, so they had to bring in a lot of transfers. Honestly, you could argue them at 13. Honestly, I should have put them at 13 because, I mean, this guy might be the best out of anyone I named on Arkansas. But Kelly Akiari at UTEP had 1,033 yards and 7 touchdowns, but he is coming from UTEP, so it's going to be hard to judge how he'll produce in the SEC. You also have Kevin Coleman at the wide receiver position, but honestly, he's been super underwhelming. He was highly recruited, went to Jacksonville State, Paul Dion. Then he went to Louisville, and he only had 362 yards last year. I think he was like the number 2 or 3 rated wide receiver in the country when he came out of high school, so he's completely underperformed. Then you have Justin Robinson, 21 catches, 257 yards. And then you have Creed Whitmore, 11 receptions, 102 yards, and Jordan Mosley, 45 yards. So basically, after the UTEP transfer, Kevin Coleman, you are looking mighty bleak there at the wide receiver position at Mississippi State. And number 15, this is why they're ranked 15th. The first guy I'm about to name, he is a converted quarterback who played wide receiver last year, Luke Doty. 13 receptions, 123 yards. You also have Nick Harbor, highly recruited out of high school as an athlete, 12 receptions, 195 yards for him and a touchdown. Gage Lavardian, who coming in from Miami of Ohio, might be your best wide receiver. 42 receptions, 679 yards. We'll see how he translates to the SEC. Jared Brown, 5 receptions, 81 yards and a touchdown. And then DeLavon Campbell comes in from Nevada. Again, a lot of these teams towards the bottom, their best wide receivers are guys from lower level conferences, so I don't know how they translate. 31 receptions, 594 yards, and 2 touchdowns at Nevada. And then number 16, we won't even jump into it. It's Vanderbilt. Just like on most of these lists, it's going to be Vanderbilt. Georgia took the one good thing they had going for them at wide receiver. They took it, and they basically have nothing coming back. So that is why they're 16. But overall, guys, in my opinion, I might even say after 12 it drops off because I think A&M might even be better than these schools down here. But 13 through 16 is really bad. And that's all I got.
I may surprise you because I've got more to say about Vanderbilt than anybody else, only because of this. I've got little to add because you covered it well. Didn't really get into anything that I didn't know or anything that I've got to add to any of that. I do think that Brew McCoy, as you mentioned, he showed up pretty well on that Tennessee team that had Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt. And he, of course, was a 5-star that went to USC. And so I like Brew McCoy.
Hey, he was on Texas campus for like 2 weeks.
Playing that back and forth with USC and Texas. But Vandy, here's the funny anecdote about Vandy. So they brought in Tim Beck as the offensive coordinator. They are going to a military style option offense.
Okay.
And their top 4 wide receivers, including the guy you mentioned, all transferred. That makes sense. See ya. We're not going to catch 3 passes a year. So they got Nate Johnson, the Utah quarterback, and Diego Pavia, who was at one of the New Mexico
State.
Yeah. So they're battling for the quarterback job, but they're going to run an offense where they're going to do something with their offensive linemen where they're going to actually rotate their guards and tackles. If I read this correctly, they're going to try to switch their offensive linemen every play so that they have their best offensive linemen blocking the play. But wouldn't that be a tip off to the defense where they're running the football?
Yes,
that's what I read.
But I would love, if anyone knows a Vanderbilt fan, bring them on. Bring them on. I'd love to discuss, because what the hell? I just don't understand. I couldn't root for that. It would hurt to be a Vanderbilt football fan. I understand if you're a baseball fan, other sports, basketball, they're good sometimes, but they've never been good in football, ever. And I don't think they ever will be.
Well, I make this comment from time to time that I love to hear from Wake Forest fans, Purdue fans, Stanford fans, whatever, in football, because it's not the typical, okay, we're talking to the Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State fans, etc. But there's a limit to that. So at least all those other schools I named have good football teams and produce NFL players, and they show some life from time to time. But Vanderbilt, when you're just a complete joke and then you're relegated to do something like this, it's just ridiculous. And they pulled a stunt a few years ago that I thought was ridiculous as well. But
and if there was any year for them to actually make a leap forward, I'm not going to say they could be like the 10th best team, but they could be the 11th or 12th best team. Like the bottom of the SEC, like I just read off, South Carolina is not going to be good. They're not. Arkansas is not going to be good either.
No.
Mississippi State in the first year under Jeff Lebby's not going to be good. If you would have made somewhat of a push to do something of relevance and maybe put some money in the football program, you got to had a 6-6 bowl year, and hell, that would have been, Vandy fans would celebrate over that. But instead, you might be the worst team in the SEC again.
Yeah. So Dan Mullen's am I getting my seasons confused? They won 2 games in November against Kentucky and Florida. Is that the year before that? Are they working on 2 consecutive winless seasons in the SEC? I think they are. Yeah, because I thought they were showing a little life. Clark Lee's first season, they pulled off those 2 wins in November, and then they haven't won a game in the SEC since. That was in 21.